I don't exist. Peekaboo. It's me. I don't exist. Hi, it's me again. My name is Daniel Ramotowski, and I'm a senior game designer for EVE Online at CCP Games. So, why is Peekaboo amusing? We'll answer that question. So, just a bit about me. I'm pretty old, as you can tell. I've been playing EVE Online since 2005, and after 10 years of playing it, I decided this is it. This is the most meaningful thing that I've experienced, and I want to do it in my life. So I moved to Iceland, went to the CCP office, and told them that I will work there. I got the job after a few months, and that was 10 years ago. I started in customer support, and then I moved into game design. Currently, my title is Senior Game Designer, and my role is Project Creative Lead. So myself and a producer, we are leading a team of 15 people from multiple disciplines. This is one of 3 such teams for EVE Online. So yeah, here I am. Fun fact, I met my now wife on the day I created my EVE character, so that makes it easier to remember our anniversary. So yeah, during this presentation, I will try to share with you why I think EVE is so meaningful and how permanence has an impact on that. So object permanence, or rather lack of it, is why the peekaboo works, right? The peekaboo is what parents do to their children to amuse them, to play with them. So what is object permanence? It is an ability to recognize the existence of objects beyond your own senses. So for example, all of you came from somewhere. You live in a building, and even though you cannot prove the existence of that building right at this moment, you know it exists, right? It didn't disappear only because you stopped seeing it. You know that it's there somehow. At least you hope so. So how do you think? Are we learning this ability to understand the object permanence, or is it something we are born with? So raise of hands, who thinks we are born with this ability? Who doesn't know or has no opinion? Okay, so who thinks we learn it? Yeah, the first thing was a clue. We do learn it. So this is one of the infant's first or very important achievements or accomplishments in the early development and the early life. This up to 8 months, where children learn this ability to know that things can exist beyond their own senses. This was first studied by Jean Piaget in 1954. And he conducted a series of experiments on kids. That doesn't sound right, does it? Wait, go back. So yeah, object recognition versus object permanence. So for example, we have a little child in a room and we show them a toy, we let them play with that toy, and then visible to them, we hide it under a blanket. And if they reach out to the blanket to uncover the toy, that means that they have learned object permanence already. If they are just oblivious to what happened, or they are just disinterested or confused, that means that this child doesn't have the concept of object permanence yet. Another test is what's called A not B error. This is pretty funny. You can find YouTube videos about all this stuff. You show a kid 2 boxes, and you show them that in one box there's a toy. So you have box A, box B, and you pull the toy from the box A and you give it to the child. The kid is playing with the toy, you take it away, put it back to the box A, and you repeat that few times with the box A only. And then after, let's say, 4 times, you hide it in box B. They see it, that you hide it in box B. And then you ask them, or try to incentivize them to find the toy. They will go for the box A, even though they saw that you put it in the box B, because they don't recognize the fact that this is the same thing, right? For them, that toy just appeared out of nowhere into existence when they started seeing it, and as soon as they stopped seeing it, for them it disappeared. So the reverse of object permanence, like the fact that we have this ability to recognize that things do not disappear or just spontaneously appear into existence is used by magicians, right? They know that we all have learned and have this ability to recognize the object existence beyond our senses, and they use it to confuse us, or to surprise us, or to amuse us. If I had a hat and pulled out a rabbit out of it, you know that this rabbit existed before, right? You wouldn't be confused by the fact that there is a rabbit suddenly. You would be just confused only by the fact, how did I make it hidden before? So that was about object permanence, which is just one aspect of permanence in general. So when it comes to permanence in general, so as a word, it stems from the word to remain, which means it involves time. And this is crucial to understand this concept, both for the permanence itself, for object permanence, and for meaningfulness that I'll be talking about a bit later. The time is the crucial component. We just perceive the objects over time, even though we don't see them, right? Through memory, memory is just a function of time in our brain. So permanence in games. So the first thing we have in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the concept of lives on the arcade games. You know that you insert a coin, and that coin lasts only until your character dies or whatever is happening in the game. So you see the permanent effect of your skills, for example. If you fail at something, then it has a consequence, and that way you can perceive the permanence, right? The permanence is not only about objects existing and not changing, it is about their persistence in time and in space. So inserting the coins is the first aspect of it. Then we got high score. The first game with high score was Seawolf in 1976. So this concept means now there's a record of something that I've done, right? So the game tells me how well I've done. When I play it, I get a number that represents my competency, my ability, my skill. And I also can compare it to other people's numbers. So that's so obvious to us and so fundamental in a way, but turns out it wasn't always like this. Someone had to come up with this idea first, that maybe let's try to do something permanent that goes beyond the actual play session. Then we have save games. We all know that. Before Steam, right? Everyone tried to manage their saves. Like when you were reinstalling Windows, save games were the most precious thing to keep, because it's a record of your story or your progression or the state of your character or the state of the world of the game you are playing. So you had to keep it over time. Again, that's an aspect of permanence. Then we got achievements, like Steam achievements today. So this is a bit more sophisticated version of the high score, essentially. This is something permanent in the meaning that I have achieved it, and it is recorded, and I can see it after the fact. And it just stays there until I lose my account, obviously, but that's how the permanence manifests there. The last thing is real-world impact. I won't give you examples yet, but later we'll talk about it a bit. So meaningfulness. So that was the part of the talk, right? Designing for permanence as a medium for meaningfulness in games. So what meaningfulness means? First of all, it's an attribute of something. Meaningfulness in itself is not a thing, right? It's always something that can be meaningful. It's never meaningful on its own. So it's an attribute. Then it is associative. This means that meaningfulness, something meaningful is a symbol, is a stand-in for something. It represents something else. Like meaningful experience is not limited to the experience itself. It has to mean something in that sense. It's subjective. It's always someone that something is meaningful to, right? There's no objective meaningfulness Of course, we can talk about things that happen and are meaningful to many people, and we can recognize that meaningfulness. But it's either that we just acknowledge that it is meaningful to people, we know there are subjects, or the fact that it is meaningful to others is meaningful to us. So again, it is subjective. It is always evaluated post factum. You never think in a moment, oh, this is so meaningful. It's always after the fact. You recognize it over time. The consequence of what happened is what gives it meaningfulness. Comparative. Some things can be more meaningful than others. Some things can be meaningless. We can compare them. So when talking about meaningful experiences in games, we can list a lot of things. I try to make the list short. And I think one of the most important things that cause experiences to be meaningful in games is a difficult choice that you have to make as a player that has an impact on the story or your character or other players. If, for example, in an RPG game, you are presented with a choice that is intentionally made difficult, as in you don't know which choice is right. Some games do that. Like some games, more simple games, let's say, they make it so that it is quite obvious which choice is right, but they still allow you to choose something else just to be an ass a bit, right? Or just to experience the other way. Like in some games, you can play like in Fallout, right? You can play an intelligent person that you can associate with, or you can also play someone really dumb, for example. And then those choices are not even presented to you in some ways. You just go through. But the difficult choice is something that you are left with the consequences of after. You think about what would have happened if I have chosen differently. So that has this meaning that you just reflect on it later. Meaningful outcome. So this is a bit different. I said before that meaningful things are things that have that are a representation of something else, essentially. So here, when we talk about outcome, for example, let's say we are playing chess. The game itself is not really meaningful, the session that you have. But if we play poker with money involved, that suddenly becomes very meaningful. Or some version of roulette, for example, right? If we go for extreme. So meaningful outcome makes the experience meaningful. Social aspect. If there is social experience, if the experience is social in nature, then it automatically becomes more meaningful because we as humans are just social creatures. So any form of social experience becomes immediately meaningful. Even the achievements that I've mentioned before, they are a bit social in nature. You can show them to someone else, and that gives them meaning. Intensity. So the more intense the experience is, the more meaningful it can be. Even if on its own you don't reflect on it later, you don't associate with something necessarily, that very experience, if it's intense enough, if it's a shocking experience, will leave some mark on you. And we are just some of our experiences. So even if you are not really conscious about it, it will still affect you. It will still make who you are in the end. Relatable, as in the character is kind of like me, like his life or their life or her life is kind of like mine, or the situation my character is in is similar to what I have experienced. These things that we can relate to become much more easily meaningful later because they bring up some other thoughts that you already had or some new thoughts about the experiences that you already had. Immersive, if it's easy to get lost, to just be part of the story, let's say, or part of the experience, if the character that represents your actions, if you feel like this character, essentially, if the game is immersive enough, then you experience more of what happens to the character as it is happening to you. So that makes the experience more meaningful. And memorable. This is essentially just a sum of all the other items on the list. if you remember the experience after the fact, if you think about it, then that's already meaningful, right? That has an impact on you. So that's my summary of what meaningful means. Essentially, if something is consequential in any capacity, then it is meaningful. Again, we have a function of time hidden here. Consequence is something that happens after a particular event or action. So for me, the experience becomes meaningful when it has a consequence. So we arrive at a very simple graph chart that can represent what I've been talking about so far. So we have the meaningfulness at the top, which is a result of consequences, or rather a representation of consequences. And we have meta-permanence that I didn't talk about yet, but I will, and object permanence that I mentioned at the very beginning. So meta-permanence, you can take, for example, the high score or achievements. That could be the meta-permanence. This is different than the object permanence that I talk about the experiment of. Meta-permanence is something that just persists through time. And of course, we can add all the other elements that I listed before to the chart, and that's how I see this, right? We have meta-permanence that can affect social experience, and that in turn can make the experience more intense because it's social, because there's more at stake, like your reputation. But also social experience can lead to meaningful outcome, but also meaningful outcome itself can lead to social. And then consequences can create immersive experiences, and that can be a relatable experience, and we can go on and on and on. So you can recognize that we are way past science here, right? This is just my own interpretation. What I'm trying to do here is just to provoke you to think about these things and build yourself your own mental model about what permanence is, how it affects meaningfulness, how that relates to my game. So some companies take meaningfulness pretty seriously. So this is our company, CCP mission statement. Our mission is to create virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. So this is on our website, but also in the reception in our office in like this font. So this is provocative and pretty serious, but it's also very controversial. Even internally at the office, we have like at least once a year, someone challenges this. Like, this is stupid. Like, how is a game more meaningful than having kids, right? And we have these discussions that lead to interesting thoughts, because there's always someone that asks, more meaningful than real life. How much more meaningful? Like 30%? So, should all games be meaningful? I say no, but you may have your own answer. I think the more important question is my game meaningless? I think that is what all of us, designers or developers or people creating games, should ask ourselves, is my game meaningless? If it is, should I really work on it? Should I really release it? Like, what does it give people that play it? Of course, nothing is ever meaningless. Anyone can find a meaning in whatever that you cannot expect, right? The tiniest aspects of your game. So it's very difficult to answer this question in an objective way, because you don't know. You don't know your players, really. You can have research, you can have theory about who your audience is. But again, meaningfulness is subjective. You can never know whether something that you create is meaningful or not. But still, it's a question worth asking. So let's talk about a game that is the most meaningful to me. EVE Online. It's a massive multiplayer online RPG with around 30,000 concurrent users currently. So on average, there's like 30,000 players playing the game at any given time. We had millions of players over the years, and this is a single shard persistent universe. And the single shard is very important in this context of meaningfulness and permanence. Single shard, for anyone that doesn't know, is we don't have servers, plural. We have a server, or the server, just one. So everything happens in the same space for everyone. If you see an article written about the game and it mentions some names of players or their organizations, when you join the game, you are playing with them immediately. You are in the same world. And it's a pretty old game. It's been running since 2003, so it will be 22 years old next year. It is a sci-fi game. It's happening in space. There's 7,800 solar systems that you can visit, 67,000 planets, thousands of NPC stations, but also player-owned stations that you can dock at, interact with, trade, fit your ship, etc. So the space is pretty big. It's a player-driven sandbox, so there's not that much content that we provide to the game, or rather, the players do not really play for the content of the game. So this is a map of sovereignty in systems in the game, because players can claim sovereignty over particular solar systems. And this has been taken, I think, like 3 days ago. There's a fun fact about Guinness Federation in the low left corner and in the center. I will talk about that a bit more. But essentially what you see, like the center space is where players cannot claim sovereignty. Outside space, like majority of the map, is where players can. So this is just a bit of a zoom, so you can actually see the solar systems, because in the previous map they were not visible. So this gets pretty complex. Like you see on the right, there's like a lot of small factions that just fight each other constantly to claim the territory from each other. This is a fictional settings, but the stories are real. We have history books written about what is happening in Eve. And it is not about the stories that we create. It's about the stories that players create. So those are 2 volumes of the Empires of Eve. This is written by Andy Groen, a journalist, gaming journalist. He devoted like 10 years of his life to write these. And they are pretty amazing. Like if you are into history even a bit, this is just an interesting read, because this is about things that actually happened, even though the world is fictional. So Eve is hard. I spoke to some of you over the last few days, and each one of you who said, I tried Eve once, and that was it. Yeah. And at some point, we as a company, we were proud of it, right? This was on our website. When you try to download the game, this was the welcome screen. Eve is hard, are you sure? That's pretty arrogant, but at the same time, it kind of reflected of how we think about Eve. Why is it hard? And why that matters. I'll talk about that a bit more. Here's what players think about the difficulty in Eve. So this is the learning curve, right? We have gaming skill and y-axis and time spent playing. And there's a comparison to some games, and EVE Online has this chart. So this is what players think about EVE Online. So you can tell that we are proud about the fact that EVE is hard, but EVE players as well. They like this perception of the game that exists in general community, that EVE is very hard, because they feel like they are mastering something that is challenging and hard. So that gives it meaning too. So EVE is based, the economy in EVE, we could have a talk just about the economy in EVE. If you heard about the game, then you probably have heard about its economy. It's the most complex economy except the real one that exists. So people study it. Universities study economy in EVE because it gives them pointers towards, it lets them predict some things that happen, because it behaves very similarly to real economy. And the size of the economy, as it says here, we have over 1 million market transactions per day on one server. So players just trading with other players. There's essentially no NPC market per se. All transactions happen between the players. We have few Guinness World Records. So largest multiplayer video game PvP battle, 8,825 players. So that actually happened. We had like over 8,000 players fighting for 23 hours straight. Like people were calling sick at work just to participate. And we got a Guinness World Record. And the previous one was also ours. And then most concurrent number of players, the highest concurrent number of players, that was the same battle was at, because during 23 hours it was over 8,000. In one specific time it was over 6,500 players. Then press likes to associate our battles and losses with real money because the titles become more sensational. You can make such calculation. It's not that you can take money out of the game, but you can put the money in and buy ships if you want from other players. So they estimated the most costly video game battle happened in EVE was over $300,000 worth of losses. And I showed you before the map with the Goonswarm thing on the left and in the center. So I guess, I mean, if Guinness World Records is paying attention, then we are probably getting a new one after what happened last week. Because Goonswarm Federation, one of the biggest organizations in EVE with 40,000 players, they decided to move house after 10 years of living in one space. So they are 40,000 people accumulating assets in one place. Then they decided to move to another part of the galaxy. And that move happened last week. So it was 60,000 players moving their stuff, their ships, from one part of the galaxy to the other. That was pretty big. So that might be the biggest organized player event that happened in games. But I don't know. We'll leave it to the Guinness guys. EVE is full of drama. You probably know. So players cheat each other, scam each other, and that is permitted. The first time it happened, like at the beginning of the game, where there was a corporation and players, and one player just stolen everything from all players. And all those players started sending us tickets, petitions, like, please return my stuff. I worked on it hard, and it was all taken away. And we were debating what we should do. I mean, I wasn't part of this. This was like 20 years ago. But they were debating what we should do. And the decision was, no rules were broken. Like, the game worked as intended. What was broken was trust. And we are cool with it. That's part of the game now. And that is where all those famous articles come from. It's players abusing the trust of others. Project Discovery, that's a real world impact of the game. So this is citizen science. If you don't know the term, this is where regular citizens can participate in scientific projects. So we collaborate with massive multiplayer online science. It's a company from Switzerland, I believe, or Belgium. And they work with universities that provide projects that require a lot of human input or verification. And we make it into a mini game inside of EVE Online that you play. For example, the first project we had was searching for exoplanets. And it was done with the help with the Nobel Prize laureate who discovered the first extrasolar planet. He helped us build this project. So players, EVE players, actually, by doing the mini game, they were helping computers to learn how to spot exoplanets. Then other projects involved, for example, the most recent one before was about helping finding or identifying the reasons for COVID. I don't know the details exactly, but players participating in it had an impact, real impact on real lives. So permanency in EVE. Death is a serious matter. That is the first sentence in the game design document of EVE. That's how it starts. That's what people who created EVE wanted it to be. That death has consequences. That is what makes it serious. That is what makes it meaningful. But other things that are applying to permanence or rather building the perception of permanence in EVE is the fact of the ownership of things you have, the exchange of the ownership where you trade with other players, the persistence of things that exist in the game. They don't just randomly spawn out of nothing, and they don't disappear in nothing. Everything that exists in game has been, for example, if you see a ship that exists in the game that someone is flying, you know that this ship was probably bought, that this person bought it from another person, and that person has built it from materials bought from other people who bought them and refined the ore that someone else mined 5 years ago. So there's probably still some ships that have the minerals that I mined in 2005 in the game. Just the perception that this is how it works gives meaning to things as well. And the locality of items. Items don't teleport. We try to simulate real world, as in, if the item is here, then it is here. It's not that you can claim it somewhere else. If you buy something on the market, you buy it on the market where it was placed on the market, in specific location. So you have to haul it from one place to another. So this is a short story about permanence and how it is important to players. So as I mentioned before, I started in customer support. And I remember that once I got a ticket to answer, which was from a player who said, I bought a Titan. So by the way, Titans are the biggest ships in the game. Like, it took 3 months for the players to build the first Titan ever, and about 1,000 players had to participate in it to build the first Titan, but only 3 of them knew what they were doing. It was all done in secret, because otherwise other group would have ruined their plan. So these things are pretty significant, Titans. And he said in that ticket, so I bought a Titan from someone else, and that someone else claimed that this Titan participated in the first Titan battle that ever happened. Is that the Titan? Can you tell me? And I couldn't. And that was pretty depressing. I knew that it was, because I checked it, right? Because in EVE, items persist, as I said. So I had the logs for access to logs for every item that exists in the game. Like, it's full history from the moment it was created. So I knew it was the Titan, but I couldn't tell them, because we had a debate about it internally, and we decided that if we tell this guy about it, then he will start bragging about this fact that now I own the Titan that you had, and now we are fighting each other, right? So I got your stuff. I was here. I pee on your monument, right? And we didn't want to give the players this knowledge, because everyone else will start asking these type of questions. And we just couldn't handle that. And I regret that that was the state of things back then. But this is the moment that I often think about. Like, how can we make the perception, the permanence more apparent? How can we represent the history of items, history of things better, so that the players can associate their emotions with those things? Because it turns out it was pretty important for that person to know that this was the Titan, even though it could be a different Titan and someone else couldn't tell the difference, because there's no in-game information about, is this Titan different than the other? You can give it a name, but you can change the name at any time. So, but it was very important to him to know that it was exactly this one. Player culture is another form of permanence. Those alliances, those are just logos of them. They exist for decades now, and players associate themselves with those groups, and they have their own identity, and those things are permanent to them. They persist over time. Friendship machine, and how is that an aspect of permanence? I will get to that. But interesting fact, 76% of EVE players declare that they made friends through the game. This is stupidly high number. This is not normal. So we were shocked when we first discovered this. So we started repeating this research every year since. It's been over 10 years, and the number is roughly every year the same, at the same place. Like, when other game producers, developers hear about this, they don't believe us. This is stupidly high number. And you can also see here, the University of Iceland is starting a course on EVE as a friendship machine. Like, what happened here? Come on. if FanFest is a part of Friendship Machine. If FanFest is just an event that we make for EVE players, and it happens every 1 or 2 years. And last year we had over 2,000 attendees. All tickets were sold out. And Iceland is not the best place to have an event like this because it is one of the most expensive countries in the world. And maybe it's equally placed between Europe and States, so that means that it's equally difficult for everyone to come there. But still, they come there every year to talk about spaceships, but not really. They come there to meet their friends. And here's a picture, for example, of a couple that got married during the FanFest. And we have a space pope. This is a person called Max Singularity in the game, but he's a scientist at NASA, and he just cosplays as a space pope and gives people weddings at FanFest. Funny thing, I don't know did that actually happen, but there was an idea that he will name one of the mountains on Mars with his EVE character name, which is Max Singularity, because he's a pretty important guy at NASA. He's like knowledge master or something like that for JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I believe he wanted to do that. I don't know that it happened, but that would be pretty cool aspect of permanence, right? How my character becomes a name of a mountain on Mars that people call it for the next 1,000 years after we start living there. I'll show you a short trailer. It's just 2 minutes, but it is about permanence in EVE. It shows it very well. We made it for the 18th anniversary of the game, and every name, logo you will see, all of what you see is made by players. There's also like some player footage from the game, so you'll see how the game actually looks, because so far I've been just talking about it. So yeah, let's play that and see whether it works.
On 6th of May 2003, a universe was born. An expanse of untapped potential. Then came life. And union. You ventured forth into the unknown, spreading out to the farthest reaches. Humble beginnings gave way to pioneering frontiers. You forged your diplomacy among the blaze of stars. And you drew your lines in the sand. Your rivalries shaped your world, triggering wars of unprecedented scale. Breathing life into the galaxy, you wrote the history of EVE. Countless stories of greatness, treachery, and rebellion. A tapestry of emerging and collapsing empires. As the greatest events of your past and the achievements of your community have become legend. The future is yours to write.
Okay, so that's what EVE is, or how we think it affects players, but also how players affect EVE. Right? All what you saw, all the names of the events with the dates and all the names of the organizations, players, it is all what players have made. And that makes it very meaningful for them to be part of this universe because they leave legacy in it. Like those events that happened since 2003 and were happening over the years, you still can feel the effect of them if you join the game today. Most of those organizations still exist. You can join them. You can be part of that history. So, how we design EVE Online for permanence at CCP? The answer will be pretty provocative. We don't. We don't really think about it. It's just the nature of the game that dictates it. Everything we do, every new system we introduce to the game, every new content we introduce to the game, we never think about it whether it has a permanent effect or not, and whether it will have consequences or not, because it's just a fundamental thing of the game that it will. So we don't really reflect on this aspect, really, as in this aspect as its own category of thinking that we should judge our designs through. It's rather everything we do is from the point of view of permanence, so we don't even notice it. And I actually don't remember, do I have the slide that says why is that? So I'll talk about a bit why that happened. It happened because of the choice of the technology we made to make EVE Online. So EVE Online operates, like what is behind EVE Online, why it works, is a database. And in 1998, where the game was started to be developed, CCP, the company, have chosen database to keep the record of things that happen. And other people in the industry were just surprised, and they told us, are you normal? Like, databases are for banks, guys, what are you doing? And it's funny because it is pretty important for banks to keep the records permanent, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be so happy to keep our money there. So the choice of using a database as a technology to support the game, to keep the record of everything, it was intentional because they wanted from the start, the makers, the original creators of EVE, they wanted from the start for things to persist in time, for you to leave legacy, for things to have consequences. And database was the choice. And then that just permeated through all the other tools we have and all the design philosophy we have about EVE. It is just a permanent universe that exists since 2003, was never reset. It just continues to be developed. So everything we do in it is in that mindset. So us, we in particular, don't really think about permanence that much. Maybe it's only me, really. Because, as I said, about the Titan story, that got me to start thinking about these things. So let's talk about practice a bit. We have about 15 minutes left. So I just want to give you some tips and maybe an advice of how you can increase meaningfulness of your games by using permanence as something that affects it. So make the experience social. That is the first and foremost thing. If there's any social aspect in your game, that immediately it makes the game more meaningful, if that's your intent for the game to be meaningful. Of course, not all games need to be social. Not all games can be social. Some games are perfectly fine solo. But if you can make them social to any capacity, then that definitely increases the meaningfulness of the player experience in them. Then if you can make the social experience, then make the experience itself meaningful. This is something that I talked about before, but how you do it, just make the cooperation necessary, or at least beneficial. If players are forced or pushed towards cooperating with each other, then their play sessions are immediately more meaningful to them. They remember what they have done. They will think about it. They will be reflecting on those things. Give players a chance to support one another after a devastating loss. So if in your game there is any form of cooperation or any way for players to interact with each other, and at the same time there's a risk, there are high stakes in the game, and the player can experience devastating loss or failure that causes them to be less able to proceed further, allow other players to help them. This is extremely powerful thing, right? In our research on EVE, because the friendship machine, as I call it, is actually the given name for the project that has been running for about 8 years now in the company. We study extensively how player relationships work, how human relationships work, and where they come from, and why EVE is able to have an audience that says, that 76% of says, I made friends in the game. It is because the game is so brutal and so difficult, but it allows others to help you after a devastating loss. If you can pull this off, it will be great. The time direction when it comes to permanence. Just don't disappear objects or don't appear them in space. Make a tiny story about why this object is here, right? Like, don't ever do it so that players can see that the objects just appear, or themselves as players, that they just appear in the universe, right? Today, games often mask this. For example, if a game starts on a planet, then the loading screen, in quotes, is you dropping from the orbit, right? There's a little story, like you don't just appear there. And the same with the objects, just pay attention to that. The language that you're using in the games. If players, like if your players see any of these words used in UI in the game, it just ruins the immersion, right? I mean, that might be an exaggeration, but you get the point. If you tell the players that this button responds my character, that just ruins the fantasy, right? And lowering the immersion lowers the meaningfulness of the experience. So if you can avoid these words, don't show them to players. Probably the biggest offense is if your players are talking between each other about mobs spawning or themselves spawning or respawning, then something wrong happened on the way. Respect your players, as in let them have impact. Let them feel that what they do has meaning. As in, if I, as a player, go through a corridor and I open the door and I walk through that door, and then I go around and I see that door again and it's closed, then something wrong happened. I know that I left it open. Why is it closed, right? Like if you spawn things, if you reset things because the player just appeared in that space, then that, again, can ruin the experience. If you are able to persist the consequences of players' actions and allow them to see that, then that increases the meaningfulness of the experience. So how much permanence you want in your game? The less permanence there is, the more playful the experience is, right? The stakes are lower. And it is fine if the game has low permanence or even low meaningfulness. It is fine just to play it with like a toy. It is fine to have a joyful and playful experience. It's all okay. Like it doesn't make the game better that it is meaningful. Some meaningful games are pretty horrible. And at the same time, some meaningless games are pretty cool to play, right? Just be mindful of where your game is going, what you want it to be. And realism, for example, if you want your game realistic, it just requires permanence. This is similar to what I said before, like spawning, resetting. If those things happen in your game, they are not realistic. Thus, if your aim is to make a realistic game, avoid that. Create the illusion for the players, right? We all are just magicians creating illusions. Make that illusion believable. And realism itself increases meaningfulness too, if that's your goal, to have more meaningful experience, but also more realistic experience. So the implementation aspects, what I said about the technology, the choice of technology is pretty important because it affects how you think about the game. If the production is ongoing for years, for example, the choices of technology or the choices of the fundamentals of the game in the very first weeks or months will affect how the designers on that project think about things. Like what happened in Eve, the fact that this is a database, the fact that we have the world as the first-class citizen, not the player character as the first-class citizen. This is very important. Often in games, it is the player character that everything is created for, right? The illusion is for the player that, okay, I am in this world and I do this, I do that happened or that happened. But in reality, it is actually an illusion, right? The game is programmed so everything is around the player. All the game logic is in the player character, for example. That's an extreme example, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say, that such things that you wouldn't normally associate with the final player experience as the choice of the technology or the choice how you structure your logic in the game, they can affect how the designers think about those things later. If it is the player character, the first-class citizen in my game, or is it the world that will have an impact of how you think about those things and later how players perceive them. So the problem with the computers is that you cannot tell the computer to not do something, right? You can only instruct computer to take an action, to do something specific. For example, you cannot make an instruction for the game that says not to spawn NPCs when the player is looking, right? You can only tell the computer, try to spawn an NPC every minute, but always check before whether the player is looking or not, right? Everything has to be active in that sense. And this also has an impact of how the permanence is then perceived in the game. And as I say here, in simulation, by default, things just don't exist, right? So this is something we work against. Like in the first example, where kids learn that objects persist in reality at some point. In computers, they don't. We have to create them every frame, essentially. And you have to be mindful of that if you are thinking about permanence, because we need to create an illusion of permanence, because nothing is permanent when it comes to computers. When it comes to narrative, using an unreliable narrator is a good way to have a way out if you want to change the story later, right? If you want the story to make sense, using an unreliable narrator that can be wrong can help you with that. Because otherwise, if you retcon the story after it was told to the players, then just, again, it reduces the immersion, and that reduces the meaningfulness of the game. I will skip this, but maybe just a word. You can tell the players about whether objects exist or not, even if they don't see them, through UI, through sounds. Just keep that in mind if you create all the ways to communicate with the player about the state of the things, about the state of their character or the world. You can communicate permanence through more than just visual aspects. Sounds play part in this as well. So what influences it is your intention. 1 minute left? Okay. Just be mindful of permanence and meaningfulness of your game. Do you want it or not? The tech fundamentals have an impact of how you think about things you do. The tools at your disposal, the narrative, and art and UI, all those things can influence permanence. So don't peekaboo your players unless that's what you want to do. Thank you.